I think I'll begin by reading a poem called The Betrayal, a poem for my father. I published this poem almost 30 years ago, but I had been working on it, I think, for about 3 or 4 years. And I recall finishing it on the train, travelling from Galway to Dublin and weeping, because the poem itself recalls the experience of my father, who had been in the national struggle, who had been involved in the Civil War, and who had sought to make a living in what would in my time be our republic. The Betrayal, a poem for my father. This man is seriously ill, the doctor said a week before, calling for a wheelchair. It was after they rang me to come down and persuade you to go in. Condemned to remember your eyes as they met mine in that moment before they wheeled you away. It was one of my final tasks to persuade you to go in, a Judas chosen not by apostles, but by others more broken, and I was in part, relieved when they wheeled you from me, down that corridor confused without a backward glance. And when I had done it, I cried out on the road, hitching a lift to Galway and away from the trouble of your cantankerous old age, and raged too at all that had in recent years befallen you. All week I waited to visit you, but when I called you had been moved to where those dying too slowly were sent, a poor house no longer known by that name, but in the liberated era of the Mass given a saint's name, Saint Joseph's. Was he Christ's father, patron saint of the worker, the mad choice of some pietistic politician? You never cared, nor did you speak too much. You had broken in attendance glasses, the holy nurse told me when you were admitted. Your father is a very difficult man, as you must know, and social welfare is slow. And if you would pay for the glasses, I would appreciate it. It was 1964, just after optical benefit was rejected by De Valera for poorer classes in his republic, who could not afford as he did to travel to Zurich for their regular tests and their rimless glasses. It was decades earlier that you brought me to see him, passed through Newmarket and Fergus as the brass and reed band struck up, cheeks red and distended to the point where a child's wonder was as to whether they would burst as they blew their trombones. The Sacred Heart procession and De Valera, you told me, were the only occasions when their instruments were taken from that rusting galvanized shed where they stored them in anticipation of the requirements of church and state. Long before that, you had slipped in ditches and dugouts, prayed in terror at ambushes with others, who later debated whether De Valera was lucky or brilliant in getting the British to remember that he was an American. And that debate had not lasted long in concentration camps in Newbridge and the Curragh, where mattresses were burned as the Gombians decided that the new state was a good thing, even for business. In the dining room of St. Joseph's, the potatoes were left in the middle of the table, in a dish towards which you and many other Republicans stretched feeble hands that shook. Your eyes were bent as you peeled, with a long thumbnail I had often watched scrape a pattern on the leather you had toughened for our shoes. Your eyes, when you looked at me, were 1,000 miles away, now totally broken, unlike those times even of rejection when you went at 60 for jobs you never got. Too frail to load vans or manage the demands of selling. And I remember when you came back to me, your regular companion, on such occasions and said, "They think that I'm too old for the job." I said that I was 58, but they knew that I was past 60. A body ready for transportation, fit only for a coffin that made you too awkward for death at home. The shame of a coffin exit through a window sent you here, where my mother told me you asked only for her to place her cool hand under your neck. And I was there when they asked would they give you a Republican funeral. In that month when you died, between the end of the first programme for economic expansion and the second. I look at your photo now, taken in the beginning of bad days with your surviving mates in Limerick. Your face haunts me, as do these memories, and all these things have been scraped in my heart, and I can never hope to forget what was, after all, a betrayal.